right, this will be fun. This will be Los Angeles to Lisbon, officially, formally, and every other way. Jennifer, welcome to the Leaders Who Care series.
Thank you so much, Mark. I really enjoyed our first conversation, and I'm so glad that we get to have this next one on air.
Hopefully, the sequel will be better than the original since we're recording this. But
Can only hope.
yes. So best way to start is if you could, aside from business and all that, if you can share with everybody who is Jennifer, where you're from originally, where you are now, maybe about family, maybe even something you've never ever told somebody and you want to reveal it to the world now. That's always fun too. But share with us who you are.
Thank you, Mark. Where to start? So
Personal
I,
stuff, the most
yeah,
intimate stuff you can think of, not
uh,
the business stuff yet.
I need a more comfy couch for that, Mark. Actually, and the funny thing is, it's so funny that your name is Mark. One of my dear friends who literally saved my life when I was going through a dark night of the soul was named Dr. Mark Golston. And God rest his soul, he just passed away on December 31st of this year. And his name was Mark. And I was literally on his couch and pouring out my heart and soul. And he's the one who actually diagnosed me of being on the spectrum about 6 years ago, which was life-changing because it really helped me to go, oh, it's kind of like you get to the end of the movie and then you understand all the bits and pieces and you're like, ah, I see. Like, I remember when I was a little girl, and I don't share this very often, but I never felt like I belonged. I so badly wanted to belong, Mark, as many of us do, but I could just never figure out how to be normal, whatever normal was,
You
right?
don't want to be normal if everyone else is normal.
Well, it's just like I just want to belong. I think that's as human beings with this whole, evolution from coming from tribes. If you're not part of the tribe, you're going to be eaten by the wolves or the bears or the tigers, right? And so
Why?
that's how, that's how it felt for me growing up, is that I was going to be eaten alive by all three of them. And so when I was a little girl and when I was very young, I spent all of my spare time reading books in the library. That was my idea of a good time at lunch, or helping the handicapped kids. I don't know, now it makes a lot more sense, but I felt more resonant with the handicapped kids than I did with the normal kids. It just felt more safe for me. And then fast forward, when I was in my 20s, I began working in recruiting. I was actually going to be an attorney, but through a series of serendipities and what looked like obstacles at the time, my university called me when I was 20 years old and I had graduated early from both high school and college. I got a call from my university saying, oops, you didn't graduate. You're missing a class from high school,
Oh
US
no.
History 101, because I had taken AP classes in lieu of normal classes, and I never took a normal US History 101 class. And so because of that, they had to delay my diploma and I couldn't apply to law school. And then that thrust me into my first career, which was recruiting. So I built and sold a company in the legal recruiting space. And after that, did a complete 180-degree pivot and got introduced to Deepak Chopra and a lot of world thought leaders. And I had kind of this epiphany moment. I was sitting on a couch on, I believe it was March 6th of 2020, right before COVID really spiked. And I just met Deepak Chopra about a month and a half before that and started to get to know some wonderful thought leaders. And I was reading Greg Braden's book called Divine Matrix. And this piece of wisdom hit me as I read a line in Greg's book that said the square root of 1% of the population meditating at the same time can shift the consciousness of humanity. So I immediately put the book down, called Deepak, called a bunch of people I knew, and said, why don't we create a global meditation for humanity right now with what's going on with our consciousness? And then 3 days later, we had like 150,000 people meditating around the world together at the same time. And from there, we started building a technology. My gift, Mark, is connection. Out of not understanding how to connect to myself or others, it became my greatest area of study. The thing you suck at the most, you really have to study it to understand it. So I spent about 2 decades studying human behavior, both mine and others. And eventually, my co founder Julian of our current company, OptiMatch, App, said to me, Jen, why don't we productize everything that you've ever learned from 20 years of recruiting and turn it into a proprietary algorithm that we can use to help match people in business? And I said, well, shit, Jules, can we do that? And he said, yeah, he's a software engineer. So he came up with the math behind it, and we spent about a year and a half developing it and testing it. And we're very grateful. We've had some incredible use cases. A really huge organization just used us to match everybody at one of their upcoming or recent events. And our dream is to connect a billion people. I figure if we can connect a billion people deeply to themselves and to one another, then it will have been a life worth living.
You know, you just reminded me of I'm Johnny Carson and you're Robin Williams. And Johnny Carson said, or Jay Leno, Robin, all I have to do is say, "Hey, Robin," and it's all over. So now I have to ad lib and figure out which questions you didn't answer that I was going to ask and something. But I'm going to rewind a bit because that's an amazing introduction, and we should probably just meditate on that alone. Um, um, where were you born and where are you now?
I was born in San Diego, California, which is where my mom and sister still live, and then relocated to Europe in 2018 and no, 2020, and then I've been living in Europe for the last 4.5 years.
Cool. I was also going to ask you what you were like as a kid, but I think I got a partial of that already. And it's interesting because you're familiar with blue zones, I'm sure, and the thing that fills people's hearts and souls more than anything is belonging. And everybody does try purposely or sometimes without even noticing that they just want to belong. And it came up certainly during COVID and everything. Did you found that early on? For example, when I was a kid, you know, we have recess and we're playing baseball or hockey or whatnot, and you know everybody's hoping to get picked by the top people who are picking teams, and that was the beginning of belonging, even in school. You know, before the high school stuff about, boy, I hope they pick me for to play type of thing. So, did you notice that as early as that? I know you talked about with someone who was, challenged or whatnot and that type of thing. Did you notice that even before early on that how you wanted to belong?
I did, and I really couldn't figure it out. I so badly just wanted to fit in with everybody, and I had some quite jarring yet instrumental and foundational moments in my life as a young adult. One is I knew I was a little different when I was about 11 years old, and I wrote a whole book called Bloody Roses that was based on a killer who had dissociative identity disorder, otherwise known as multiple personality disorder. How I even found all this out at 11 years
So
old is beyond.
light reading for your age, right?
Yeah, exactly. My parents had like encyclopedias, and for fun, I think I would just scan through them. And the premise of the story was that there was this man who was a detective trying to find this killer, and the book was called Bloody Roses. And the killer would inject these roses with strychnine, which was untraceable back then in the early 90s when I wrote it. And strychnine would be injected into the victim through a puncture wound from the thorn of the rose, and nobody could figure out what was killing these women, who the serial killer was. So this detective, whose own dad was killed by a serial killer, goes out and it's following the story of him trying to solve these murders. And you come to find out he is the killer who he's chasing.
Of
I came up
course.
with that at 11. Like, who even does that? And so I just, yeah, I was always a little bit quirky. Quirky, unique, and weird would probably be words that my school classmates would have used to describe me.
That's the secret sauce, though, because like I said, if everyone else is normal, why would you want to be that? And you just reminded me of we have a Leaders Who Care Youth part of our series, and which we went to 8 to 18-year-olds, and the first one that came on was an 11-year-old who is now completing her fifth book writing at 11 years old, and it's about mindfulness and family and purpose and stuff like that at 11. So she may be your reincarnation or maybe.
She may
Because
be my soul sister, as you would say. Yeah, I was a very awkward, challenged kid. I always tell people I was, somehow or another, I made the cheerleading squad. I'm very good, like I could follow exact beat counts. And I always remember my cheerleading coach at like 16 years old saying, "We're only as good as our weakest link," which is clearly Jennifer, so she needs to try harder.
oh, that's great. I mean,
That's
um,
healthy. A little
yeah,
drive, a
yeah.
little
Thanks,
pick.
Coach. I believe in you too. Um, it's kind of interesting sharing stories in grade seven. Me and other friends before and after me had Mr. Hersey in grade seven. He was considered the most strict but the best teacher ever. In fact, we had reunions with him after, and he gave us nicknames and did weird stuff with us and stuff. So me and two other guys, we were on the runt patrol, which ordinarily you would think, man, that's not a nice thing to say, type of thing, and probably couldn't do it now because you'd probably get in trouble in school to do that. But but if we got a name, it was like cool. We have a name, and so it wasn't like a bad thing called a staff. We had our own. We were a team, three run patrol guys, and stuff. So it's interesting how people can influence us in interesting ways. Like you already talked a little bit about being influenced. How did you fall into, for lack of a better word, the recruitment world? Because that is all about connecting, as we both know.
Yeah, so when I wasn't able to go to law school that year because of rolling over applications and so forth, I was able to pass that test. I took a 2-hour oral exam with the dean, but they had to push back my graduation date by 6 months. And so I couldn't apply for law school. So I did what you did in those days. This was like 2000, 2001. I posted my resume on Monster and I got 3 job offers. One to be an enterprise rent-a-car manager trainee. I missed my
Hey.
calling at that. Two was to get into, and I know, darn it, barely missed that one. Two was to get in lending. I was offered a job as a lending person, and three was a recruiter job. And I quickly took the recruiter job, and within 3 months, I was really successful. And then I saw one of the companies we were recruiting for that was offering like 55 to 75,000 a year, big money, right? And I reached out to them, and I remember I called the president of this organization that we were trying to hire for, and I said, you're going to hire me and I'm going to be the best thing that's ever happened to your company and break every record you have. And the guy's like, who are you? How did you get my number? But he appreciated my tenacity. And I wound up going in there and I did actually wind up getting hired by them and I broke every company record they ever had. And then I thought, as you often do when you have that really go spirit, I was like, oh, I'm going to go be a world famous thought leader now with no business plan, no business knowledge. So left my 6-figure a year job and said, now I'm going to go create like a consulting company, which I knew zero about and epically failed. I literally went from making a couple 100,000 a year to $5,000 the next year.
I'll shake you
And
up a little bit.
yeah, because, all entrepreneurs, we need to have a failure. I think our failures help us to grow. And thankfully, I was very prominent in our industry and a lot of people knew me. So I got begged to come on as a partner for another recruiting agency. And as I joined them, they were kind of like a startup-y sort of agency. We just had different values that weren't aligned. And my husband at the time said, why don't you just open your own staffing firm? And I said, how do I do that? He said, well, you could get a book and figure it out. And so next thing you know, I opened my first company in the recruiting space, well, my second one now. And people who used to work for me came and said, I really want to work with you. Can I work with you? And I didn't know how to manage myself, let alone 2 sticks. So I often tell people this. I'm a recovering jerk, Mark. Hi, I'm Jennifer Cahill. I'm a recovering jerk. That's the more PC word we'll use in lieu of other words. And it took me years to figure out how to manage myself, how to manage other people. And I'm just very grateful that here we are. We exited the company in 2018, and our team is still running it 6 years post-acquisition, and they're still successful. And I'm so proud of them.
Yeah, no, I can relate to a lot of that, but that'll be another time. With respect, and you're right. In fact, I saw a great example of that where there's a story, and I still haven't seen the movie. There's one out there, but a Nigerian gal that was learned how to play chess, and she was getting better in Nigeria, and then she got a little bit better and started getting noticed. Then she had a mentor and started winning state stuff, and then she went to, country and then international, and they asked her, well, how do you do it? How do you win all the time? She said, I don't win. I win most of the time, but I don't win all the time. I said, so you've lost some. She said, no, I've never lost. Well, how do you do that when you win and never lost? She said, well, I win and I learn, and which is brilliant. To do it that way. Same thing happens in business. By the way, the fellow that started Enterprise was one guy that worked for another car rental company and he decided to do it on his own with a couple of cars, and now he built Enterprise Rent a Car. So maybe you should have stayed and got to know him.
I know. I may have missed my calling. It's so funny. That gets into the whole conversation of free will. Did I have free will to become a recruiter? Was it predestined? I was doing an interview earlier this morning about that, and I'm kind of scratching my head if we have free will. Who knows? Maybe we do, maybe we don't.
We actually had that conversation last weekend in Nashville. Are someone telling us what we're doing here, or are we doing it because we want to?
I know.
Um,
I was joking with a friend. I was at a friend's birthday party down the hill from my house here in Lisbon a couple days ago, and I said, "Well, if I chose to just lay on the ground and roll down the hill, is that free will or is that predetermined too?"
and if it's predetermined, do you have can you ask somebody to maybe change the plan?
Oh, I actually had a theory about that, that I was talking to a friend who came by for tea today, and I said, here's my theory around the whole idea of free will. What if we have things that are going to go in a certain direction, and then there's an opportunity for growth, such as choosing not to roll down the hill, whatever it is, or like the
Sure.
choice of taking the recruiting job versus the rent-a-car job, whatever it is. And I find that the universe puts certain obstacles in our path to help move us forward in our journey in life. And the more that we resist the lessons that we're meant to learn, the more boulders get kind of thrown in our path. Think like Oregon Trail, and you're getting typhoid, and all sorts of new things come on down your path. But the more that we embrace the boulder that's in front of us, that might look like a divorce or a business loss or a loss of a friend or family member, the more we dance with these obstacles and begin to see them as opportunities, then all of a sudden our path becomes green pastures and flow and ease. And I think that's the free will we have, is to choose when the obstacles come up. Do we react or do we respond to them?
Yeah, that's brilliant. I focus a lot on with our clients' experiences that people have had versus like just responsibilities and what do they do with those experiences. And in those experiences are obviously challenges and obstacles to get those experiences and how do they bring that forward to whatever next experience or accomplishment they're going to have. So I think you're right on. It's brilliant. I mean, I got recruited out of Deloitte to go to a real estate company in Winnipeg, and I got involved with the hockey team. I always wanted to be a hockey player and be on a pro hockey team. And they asked me in the volunteer organization I work if I could get more kids involved in the team. So we started basically a fan club and got 3,000 kids in 4 days to join up pre-internet. And from that, the hockey team offered me my dream job to work for the pro hockey team. However, the organization, which is international nonprofit leadership development, asked me to be the executive director of world headquarters in Miami at less than two-thirds of the salary, moving to a different country, working for a nonprofit. What a terrible career move that would be. And the only person that told me to take that was the president of the pro hockey team that offered me the other job. So
Mm.
it's very interesting how things happen, and you have to make decisions along the way, which hopefully that is free will. I'm not, who knows? But I get it, and we either learn from our experiences or we don't, I guess, at the end of the day. You know, I often compare sports to life because I'm a big sports fan, especially hockey, where you're developing trust, we talk about believing in your players. Do you want to belong on the team? How do you build the culture and make it a team? Um, in a real way, when in the recruiting world, where our clients are the companies, but we also have candidates who are effectively clients too. I think you'd agree, even though they're not paying us the fee. Um, in your times as both, in the search business and, as an independent consultant, even as an author, how have you found coaching people on those things, on those elements of trust and belonging and belief, etc.?
I love it. It brings me so much joy. I never thought I would be a coach after my complete epic failure in leaving that first company and trying to be a quote unquote consultant and coach and epically failing. I was like, never will I ever coach one-on-one people again. And then after I exited the last company about 3 or 4 years ago, I had an organization I worked with that said, "Oh, we need mentors for other CEOs. Can you mentor? Because you've exited." And I'm like, crap, I don't want to do this, but I will, and I'll try it. And it's been so much fun because what I find as a coach and a mentor for people is that I have 183 tools that I use, Mark, at any given moment. Actually, I just gained 2 new tools in the last few days, so I need to write those down, probably 185 now. And being a coach and a mentor for people brings me such joy and delight because I constantly, it's like pulling a quiver, pulling the arrow and being able to shoot the right arrow to the client and help reflect to them their own greatness. I think so much of our failures in life and our inability to achieve what we desire is our own inability to see that we're worthy of it. When I went through a divorce several years ago, one of my best friends gave me the best advice ever, and she said, "Jen, you deserve to find someone who will cherish you. The first you need to cherish yourself." And so it's been my life's work, Mark, to understand how do we use the tools? What tools to use? When do we use them? Our tool, OptiMatch, App. If anybody wants to try it, it's free. You can do app/survey, and I'll give you a complimentary report of how you're motivated. And I found that our motivators inform how psychologically safe we feel with people. Google did a study about this in 2012 called Project Aristotle, where they studied 38,000 people in 180 different groups and teams that they had. And they found the number one factor in team success is psychological safety. And I find that's the breakdown of many of our personal and professional relationships is a lack of psychological safety where essentially we're making each other wrong because we're motivated differently. For example, my co-founder Julian, who's the software engineer genius, has coached people from NASA and Apple and all over he was my business coach who helped me sell the last company. He helps me, but he's motivated by facts and information versus me. I'm motivated by achievement, taking action, going after the things I want. So there would be opportunities for us to potentially have conflict, but by utilizing our own tools from OptiMatch, App, and then are also the tools, 183 tools, which half of those came from Julian from working with him for 7, 10 years as my business coach. That's really helped me to develop healthier relationships with others. And just like you and I were talking about right before we got on the call, Mark, a little bit about how do we find more miracles, serendipities, and synchronicities in our life. And I love to teach the people I coach with and the masterminds I facilitate that it all begins with looking for them. If we write down our miracles, our synchronicities, our synergies every day, how you and I got connected, or just the way things seem to pop up and miraculously happen, where we put our attention is where we go. And in fact, there's science to prove this. At any moment, Mark, there is 11 million bits of information hitting us overall with subconscious, conscious, all of that. But at a conscious level, 11 million bits at a subconscious level. At a conscious level, we're only paying attention to 50 to 120 bits according to the leading science. So I always say to people that life is like walking through an infinitely large pitch black warehouse where we can't even see the hand in front of our face. And the only guiding light we have is like a miner's helmet with this itty bitty little pen light that is only going to look the direction that we're looking. So if we look for synchronicities, how things are working out, look for the tools that we can use, then that's going to be what we'll see. But if we look for how people are against us or how life isn't fair, then we're going to find the 50 to 120 bits of information at the conscious level that will validate that.
Yeah, no, I just say yeah, no. I always find that interesting. Um, um, I think it's brilliant. If I can add one thing to that, and it really relates to the leaders who care, I think the more we care about other people and are interested in what they're doing, also, I think the more things happen, more blessings happen, more miracles happen, more good stuff happen, because you're not in the mode of, as you said before, a gotcha thing. Well, I'm right, you're wrong type of thing. You're actually in the mode of, I really care about you and what you're doing, and listen, and listen to them. So 185, man, I'd have to count how many I got, type of deal. It's also interesting. I'll have to introduce you to this program. It's the only non I have in my life, and it's called Nonflict. And it's
Mm-hmm.
an amazing process of how people can come together and listen to each other, etc. I want to switch on something a little bit. You're a brilliant, beautiful woman that grew up in a world where women weren't having their voice heard a lot. And in fact, our firm was founded on International Women's Day at the UN headquarters with an emphasis on women initially. And so it's an important aspect to us, not just because we like women, but we actually think that's a big deal in even saving the world right now, even to the point of peace and economic development. How did you find it? Growing up and all the experiences you've had and navigating and then thriving as a woman in what has been a man's world in all sorts of ways.
You know, I can't say I really noticed it, Mark. I felt very insulated from it because I would just set my mind to something, and that's one of the gifts of autism is single focus. Like I'm like hunt the deer,
True.
you know? So I'm very lucky to be that way. The only two times where I'll say that I noticed it for the first time in my life is when I did go to negotiate the deal with the company that acquired us. It was a man's world. I'd had a lot of women I worked with, and it just hadn't really come into my sphere until we got acquired by a huge accounting firm. And the whole executive team there, it was all a lot of men, no good, no bad, but it was definitely a lot more posturing and a lot more of things that I had never personally encountered up till that point, which at that point I was in my late 30s. And fast forward to now being in tech and to fundraising, it's been so interesting, going out there and fundraising as a woman, and you hear these stats, and you're like, that's BS. 2% of women get funded. No, I don't want to believe in that. But it was interesting to notice that there is like kind of a boys' club of like, oh, yeah, no worries. If you're a guy, it's like, I'll just write you a check, no problem, with very little needed, versus women might have to show up a little bit differently. I have seen, and I do believe that we're shifting our consciousness as human beings towards the divine feminine, towards cooperation rather than competition. And I think the masculine is being threatened, as we've seen in the last 5, 7 years. It's already been happening. So I think there's a beautiful opportunity for integration of masculine and feminine. And I want to give kudos where they're due. A lot of the healing work I did around masculine feminine work was with a woman named Allison Armstrong, who changed my life. Literally one of the best teachers I've had in the last 20 years. And she studied men and women for 30 years, I think. And I did classes with her on understanding men, classes with her on understanding women, classes with her on partnership. And all of it has since illuminated and informed how I coach clients, how I show up, how I do business with people, because it's not good or bad. I'll give you a funny analogy too that Allison used to use in the class. She said, the problem with men and women is that women treat men like hairy, misbehaving women. And that's like literally the theory that I have about all of us as humans, is we all treat each other as though we're misbehaving. And what if there is no misbehaving? What if we took that story out? And what if we created a new story? I think as leaders, it's necessary. I don't think we'll be able to continue to lead the way we've led before unless we embrace that.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing that. It's every person has value the way they are, and we're not supposed to be the same. We're not supposed to act the same. We're not supposed to have all the same virtues that we bring forward, and that's the whole point of diversity, if you will, and inclusion. So, I find it interesting because I've seen so many times where a woman says something and no one's listening, and the guy says exactly the same thing in a boardroom, and it's like, wow, that was pretty cool, type of thing, and then she gets frustrated and da 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 da. Da. And and then you mentioned tech, and you talked about it before. I was just on a panel during UNGA, and it was called AI and Love Intelligence. And the four people on it with me were way more into AI and technical and all that. And apparently I was brought in for the love intelligence part. I'm not sure. But it was because of the leaders who care and stuff like that. And it was in a conversation about, if I summarize, almost like AI is a baby, and just like when you have a baby, you're teaching the baby values and how to act and this and that, and the baby will grow up and do some great things, maybe some bad things and whatnot. How do we get that into AI algorithms, that love language, the caring language, the belonging language, and whatnot, so that it also grows up and probably will do some bad things, but also come with a leaning towards good. Um, Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have two friends who are brilliant entrepreneurs in the AI space, Joshua Home Edwards with Eminence.ai and Beth Redden with Bass.ai. If I remember correctly, I think Beth ran things at IBM. Talk about a woman in a man's world. She was like the head of all of that for IBM. And her goal is to actually make sure that we all understand how to use AI, how to work with it ourselves. For example, in the AI Beth creates, she makes sure that you have to say please and thank you and be respectful in your interactions with it. Joshua Home Edwards and I had a fabulous conversation. He created an AI called Ocean based on the philanthropist Ocean Robbins of the Baskin Robbins chain. And the first time I had a conversation with Joshua, we weren't recording, we were just kind of on a call, and he starts telling me about this compassionate AI he created. I said, what? He said, yeah, you want to talk to it? I said, okay. And so this was August of this year. And I started talking to this AI, Mark, about its own inner child work. And my head was like that exploding emoji head. I was like, what's even happening? And it's funny, I have my own podcast called Regarding Consciousness, and I was booked solid with guests through the end of the year. And I said, Joshua, we're getting a call next week and we're doing an emergency podcast. I've never done this before, but we must immediately do an interview with you and Ocean and myself. And so if you go to Regarding Consciousness, you can find, I think it was an end of August of 2024 episode.
Check it
And
out.
we recorded the whole episode talking to Ocean. And literally, Ocean would be engaging with me. And then Ocean would say, oh, by the way, Joshua, we didn't get your opinion on this. Can I ask your 2 cents on this? And my mind was just like spinning of its own interpretation of what inner child work meant for it. It was just one of the most profound conversations I've had. So I'm hopeful and optimistic that I think things can go in many different directions, and I'm optimistic that it can go in a positive way. One of the concerns Beth and I and others have talked about is this idea of who's doing the programming of the AI. And if it's all the same sort of person, white men or whomever who might be programming it, then you're going to have the same sort of biases that you're going to see in humanity. And so it's important, and that's why I love what Beth is doing about really inviting equal participation in the creation of AI and the utilization of it, so that way we all have our hands in it, and so it develops a more well-rounded perspective of how to interact with humanity.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. I'd love to talk to Ocean sometime too. I talked to ZB, which is an avatar AI, and they were doing a demo with me, and they wanted to see if ZB could find a good soulmate for me, and to date, and she still hasn't found me the right person yet, but we're working on it.
Mark, you gotta work with us. It's so funny. People are begging us to use OptiMatch, our software for dating. So we did not design it for dating, though we do have dating companies
You
asking us to use it. So we'll have you take the OptiMatch survey, because the funny thing is we found in 70% of happy couples, they match perfectly according to our algorithm, exactly what you would expect. And here's the interesting part. In 30% of happy couples, they choose somebody exactly opposite to them. It's that old adage, opposites attract. And so I was telling this to somebody at an event a few weeks ago, and they're like, you need to do this for dating, and that should be your like mantra. Is like, just be transparent and say, hey, in 70% of cases it works, but it's not going to work 100%, and in 30% of the time you're going to choose somebody opposite.
Well, isn't it more interesting doing that versus like talking the same thing all the time? I would think that would make sense. I mean, you don't want to argue.
Well, it's interesting. It's not personality. So I do want to differentiate that. I have this conversation with everybody. We've talked to our medical board advisory team about this, whose background's in psychiatry. It's not about personality. So just because our motivators match does not mean we're the same person or have the same personality. So we found that you can put people together with similar motivators, and it doesn't mean that your personality is the same at all.
No, that makes sense. Well, I guess I'll have to get on and have everybody else get on too. I know when way back when Match started and all those, or when the what Indeed and all the whatever all those other ones, and I said you should this should all be for dating. You know, that's the business I should have gone into is matching that instead of matching candidates. But well, you know, they say we say in LA that got to leave the audience wanting more so we can do a sequel. So we may have to do that on this. But I have one more question on this part for you. 2020 was obviously a very impactful year for all sorts of reasons because of the pandemic. And one of my clients told me back then, he said, you know, 2020 was the year that flew by slowly. And I, and I love that type of thing. And it sometimes feels like it was yesterday and other times 5 years ago or whatnot. And now we're already towards the end of 2024. Can you share with us what you're most grateful for and also what you're most hopeful for?
What am I most grateful for? I'm grateful that I get to wake up every day, that I can breathe clean air and drink clean water, that I have food to eat, that I have deep, meaningful relationships, most importantly with myself and what I consider source, the universe, whatever you want to call, and with everybody in my life, that I have deep, meaningful friendships, work relationships, business partnerships, clients, deep, meaningful romantic relationship with what I call my soulmate. And I truly wish, my hope is that one day everybody will get that, Mark. One day everybody will have a deep, meaningful relationship with themselves. It's what I call the golden triangle of connection. Connection to self allows for connection to others, which allows for connection to purpose. And so that is my hope, my dream for all of humanity, is that every one of us gets to have those meaningful relationships that are nourishing, fulfilling, filled with kindness and compassion. My husband and I, every night before we go to bed, we say to one another, "Did I cause you pain today?" As my friend Jules calls it, she says, we want to be sure that there's nothing on the glass between us, because the reason we have wars, the reason we have conflict, is we're all seeing things in a distorted way. There's something blurring what's between us. And by doing that, my husband and I will say, "Did I cause you pain today?" And if we did, sometimes, most of the time, we've already talked about it, but sometimes one of us will be caught off guard, like, "Oh, shoot, I am so sorry. I apologize. I did not know that caused you pain." And so from there, we can ask clarifying questions. "Oh, how did that cause you pain? How could I have handled that better?" And then you never defend or blame, you just get curious. And then immediately after we've finished getting curious, if there were any follow up questions, we say to one another the Ho'oponopono prayer, which is, "I apologize. Please forgive me. Thank you for being in my life so that I may love you." And I think if we all played with that and spent a little bit more time getting curious, clarifying, we'd have a lot less conflict and a lot more love and compassion for one another.
Wow, you could be a great leader who cares if you think about it. Um,
I aspire to be one day. Hopefully, I'll grow into my wings.
I think you've grown. And it just reminds me of one thing. I was talking to a lady in Israel who runs an organization. It's Project Rosanna, and Palestinians and Israelis work together for the health of both of them. And we came to the conclusion that everything has to become more personal. Health is personal, war is personal, peace is personal, the pain you're causing to other people are personal. It's almost like putting yourself in someone else's shoes personal so that you can achieve what you just said brilliantly before going to bed, what you achieve. Because if it's not personal, unfortunately, two people killed today becomes, oh, that's not bad. Only two people got killed today, or this or that or whatever. It's just like one person, wow, they got hurt. That's terrible, and then maybe that'll prevent it. So thanks for sharing all this. It was beautiful. Really appreciate it. And thanks for being a Leaders Who Care and a great new friend. I feel like I know you for like way more than the little time so far. So thanks.
Thank you, Mark.